In the name of Allah Almighty, the most beneficent and the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum everyone. It is lecture number 11 and today our topic of discussion is Victorian age. So first of all, I would like to tell you people why this age is called as Victorian age. It is based on the name of the Queen Victoria, and why it is named as Victorian age because in this age literature flourished a lot. Like it flourished in Elizabethan era first, and then the golden time when the literature flourished in England or in Europe, it was in Victorian age. Okay, so today the topics that we have to cover in our lecture are introduction of Victorian age, then there are characteristics of Victorian age and different periods in Victorian age, literary genres in which literature was produced and it was written. Then there is Victorian poetry, Victorian novel, Victorian prose, and then there is conclusion. Alright, starting with introduction, Victorian era in British history is the period between approximately 1820 and 1914, corresponding roughly to the period of Queen Victoria's reign 1837 to 1901. So if we look at this time period, approximately it is from 1820 to 1914. But when we look at the time period during which Queen Victoria reigned the England, it was from 1837 to 1901. And more appropriately, we consider this time period as the exact duration of this age. Alright, and it is characterized by a class-based society. It means that the consciousness was arising among people about the poor and the rich class, because the classes were emerging based on the industrialization, based on scientific revolution, because of the development in the economy. As a result, the classes were originating like rich class, poor class, like upper class and the lower class, such that. Alright, so this era is characterized by such class-based society. A growing number of people able to vote. At this time, the political developments had taken place, and as a result, people were able to vote as well. A growing state and economy, and Britain's status as the most powerful empire in the world. And it was this time period when Britain ruled the world, and it became one of the most powerful empire in the world. Alright, next we have characteristics of Victorian age. There were different characteristics we have also discussed in the introduction, but just for the sake of understanding and for the sake of details, I am going to repeat them here. Britain became powerful and rich. The Victorian stands as a landmark for several reasons. First and foremost, it was during the same period that England became the world's most powerful and richest countries by ruling a quarter of the world's population, thereby having a largest empire. At this time period, Britain was the largest empire in the world. We can also take its example of the subcontinent India, because we, the people of the Pakistan, then that was the part of subcontinent India, had also been occupied by the Britain. So it was also part of the Britain Empire. Alright, so there were 4 continents on which the Britain had exerted its influence. Alright, so as a result, it became the most powerful and the richest countries in the world because of its empires, because of expanding its economy. Also, the demand for goods like food, clothes, and housing increased substantially as a consequence of the increase in population from 16 million to 37 million. So there was an increase in population. Alright, as a result, there was demand of food. Like when population increase, there will be a more demand of food, there will be a more demand of clothes, and there will be a more demand of housing. So this demand kept on increasing and population increased from 16 million to 37 million. Why did population increase? There were 2 factors. Number 1, improvement in the medical facilities, because people who used to die before that time, when there were no medical facilities, population decreases. But when medical facilities improved, and people had more opportunities to survive the diseases, so they kept on living. So as a result, population increases. Number two, also because of the scientific development and the medical facilities, there was reduced mortality rate. People who used to die, like the number of the people who died before this scientific revolution, it decreased. Alright, so population increased from 16 million to 37 million. So in order to understand the literature of that time, we also need to understand the background of that age, that what developments were taking place at that time in England. Alright, so number two, Britain becomes industrialized. Before that, Britain was agrarian society. What do we mean by agrarian? Agrarian means the society which is based on getting its living from the land, like cultivation, farming, such type of activities were involved in agrarian society. But when it shifted to the industrialized society, so what happened? There were installation of the industries, there occurred establishment of the factories. As a result, economy improved, so Britain became industrialized. So because of industries, the economy also flourished. Another Victorian era characteristics was the industrialization of Britain. A number of factories sprawled. Sprawled means increased up, leading to vast improvements in the living as well as working standards of the people. So what happened? Because of these factories, not only the living standard of the people improved, but also the working standards also improved. How? Before that, people used to work in the fields, at farms, and they had not that good living standards. But after that, when they became laborers in industry, so their living standard improved. This also resulted in the emergence of various towns. Railways were constructed which replaced the traditional horse-drawn carriages as a mode of transport. So what happened? People used to travel on horses, there were horse carriages, but when with the development of railways, so what happened? This mode of transport is shifted from horse carriages to the railways. Alright. Apart from this, a lot of scientific inventions took place, like the telephone, the radio, railways, swing machines, etc. were invented. So not only just these industries, but the scientific development. Because of this, the scientific inventions, telephone was invented. Because of that, the communication across the regions increased. The radio, so that people can get the news from across the world. Railway, so that people can move from one place to another. So there was increase, at that time there increased the developments related to the communication and locomotion. Swing machines, and as a result, the commercialism of the clothes also increased. Architecture, art, and culture. Culture as well as architecture flourished during this period. The Gothic revival architecture was noteworthy, resulting in the clash between Gothic and classical ideals. So, culture relates to the customs, norms, traditions of a particular society. Alright, and architecture is, these are the buildings and the way the buildings are constructed, it is that. Alright, so culture and architecture also flourished during this period. The Gothic revival. What is Gothic? Gothic is related to the tradition and customs of the English society from 12th century to the 14, like from 1200 to 1400. That time period is called as the Gothic. Alright, so the construction that took place at that time, people wanted to revive it. Why? Because they wanted to revive the traditions of their own ancestors, but there was a clash between Gothic and classical ideals. Classical ideals means relating to the Greek and Roman structures, so they wanted to construct it that way, and as a result there was clash. Additionally, in 1851, the Great Exhibition, which displayed the best innovations of the 19th century, was also organized, which was the first of its kind. So what happened in 1851? Great Exhibition. So 19th century, because whatever developments that took place at that time, they were exhibited in front of the people so that they could have an understanding of what are these new inventions. Photography also emerged during this period, the first photograph being that of Queen Victoria herself. She became the first monarch to be photographed. Post-mortem photography was another key feature of the Victorian age. So photography was emerged. It is not that photography that we do today, like we click photos from the phones and from the cameras. It is not that photography. It is instead, it was, before that there was painting, sculpturing, and then yes, there were some reels, and the very first invention related to the photography that took place at that time. Alright, so postmortem photography is that photography after the death of some person, and it was the key feature of the Victorian age. Improved communication and transport was a distinctive feature. And one thing that I would like to add here, apart from your lecture, it is that it was the communication, means of communication, and the mode of transport. These were the two things, and you can say these were the two developments which revolutionized the world. Because before the invention, before the development in communication and transport, the world was totally different. An important characteristics of this period was the advancement in different modes of communication as well. Goods could now easily be transported by steamships and railways, which resulted in facilitating trade. Although people were producing goods, they had something to exchange with one another, but they were not able to sell their things far off the cities, like off the continents. Steamships further also contributed to making international travel popular. And additionally, even cinema, telephone, telegraph, cars, and aircrafts gave a boost to Britain economy. So all these things were the reasons that why the economy of the Britain, it flourished and it boosted. Alright, so why do we need to read these characteristics: architecture, art, industrialized society, that is the Britain became powerful? So what is the need to understand such concept? There is a need to understand, because along with these things are the witness in the literature of the Victorian age, which tell us that what type of developments were taking place at that time. So without understanding the background, without understanding the history of the age, we cannot understand it completely. Because in different pieces of literature like poetry, in novel, in prose, we have instances of these developments, and due to which we can and without background we cannot understand it. Alright, scientific progress, yeah, that is most important one of the most important progress of that time, because it was because of this progress that mortality rate was reduced. Queen Victoria's regime witnessed the progress of science by leaps and bounds. Ether and chloroform started being used as anesthetics. So ether and chloroform, they started being used as anesthetic, and before that there were the surgery was performed without anesthesia. So patients had to go through a lot of pain. These anesthetics were also used in cases of dentist treatments where there is a lot of pain involved. Apart from this, even antiseptics were introduced, which were in the form of carbolic acid, phenol. So apart from this, antiseptics means the medicines which kill germs. So they were also introduced in the form of carbolic acid. Though this era is a landmark one for countless things, yet this era also witnessed the darker side of such a rapid progress. So there was also the darker side of the rapid progress in terms of the humanity, because family values declined because of industrialization, and there were a lot of other things which also affected mankind in one or the other way. Alright, so there are two periods in Victorian age with respect to the literature, that we divide this age into two periods: the early Victorian period and the later Victorian period. So Victorian early period, it is from 1832 to 1848. It can be described as a time of dramatic change with the improvement of the railroads and the country's first reform parliament, but it was also a time of economic distress. Number two, the later period, that is 1870 to 1901, it was a time of changing attitudes about colonialism, industrialization, scientific advancement. Rebellions and war in the colonial territories made the public increasingly more aware of the cost of empire. So this was a time period when there were the improvement. You can say there was a positive change in the world, and positive change because of the Britain, how the people started living their lives, And in the later Victorian period, so what type of changes were there? There was a change in the attitudes of the people about colonialism, because there was, and if you remember, there was war of independence in India in 1857. That was also an anti-colonial attitude in which the people of the India did not want to be ruled by the England. All right. So there was industrialization, there was exploitation of the different areas, scientific advancement, rebellions, and such. The later Victorian period is also called as the period in which there was a distress among the people around the world regarding the cost of the Britain Empire. All right. So here we read and analyze different literary genres during which literature was produced at that time. Literature was produced in the form of poetry, in the form of novel, and in the form of prose. Starting with Victorian poetry. So Victorian poetry was also indifferent from the already stated style. Much of the work of the time is seen as a bridge between the Romantic era and the modernist poetry of the next century. So what happened? Before romantics, like before the romantic poetry, what poetry was written? That was neoclassical, and before that it was reformative and Renaissance poetry. All right. So what trends were followed in that poetry? If we talk about the Elizabethan and the neoclassical, they were the poetry was written didactic, having like life for art for life's sake. But when we talk about the romantics, that was the art for art's sake. But when we talk about the Victorian poetry, this Victorian poetry is called as the midway between the classical, midway between the romantic and the modernist. Modernist poetry is that which follows the Victorian poetry. It means that from 1901 to 1945, that time period is called as the modern era, and the poetry in the modern era is also called as the modernist poetry. So the trends which are followed in the modern poetry are completely different. The trends followed in the Victorian poetry are somewhat different. So we can say that it is a bridge between romantic poetry and the modern poetry. Alfred Lord Tennyson held the poet laureateship for over 40 years. He remained poet laureateship, means the poet of the government, means anywhere his verses will be, he will be the one who will compose poems for the soldiers, poems for the government. All right. The husband and wife poetry team of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and the Robert Browning conducted their love affair through words and produced many tender and passionate poems. So Robert Browning and his wife Elizabeth Barrett Browning, they are the big names in the Victorian poetry, and they produce such poetry which also involve their love, their emotions for one another. Poetry written in England during the reign of Queen Victoria may be referred to as Victorian poetry. Following Romanticism, Victorian poets continued many of the previous era's main themes, so such as religious skepticism. Skepticism means doubt. Valorization means bravery of the artist as genius. So, because this age followed the Romantic age, all right. So what happened? There were some traces of the Romantic era in the Victorian poets. Like there were some common themes like religious skepticism, valorization of the artist. But the Victorian poets also developed a distinct sensibility. The writers of this period are known for their interest in verbal embellishment. Embellishment means decoration. So the writer of this period also involved in decorating their verses, their work of art. Mystical interrogation, brooding skepticism, and whimsical nonsense. Mystical interrogation means asking questions related to the mysticism. Brooding skepticism, brood means worry, and skepticism means doubt. So it is the doubt that involve you, that indulge you in some kind of worry. And whimsical means abnormal nonsense. All right, so something which was not normal. They talked about such things. All right, so poets of the early Victorian age are Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, their husband-wife, Matthew Arnold. Poets of the later Victorian age are Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Christiana Rossetti, Algernon Charles Swinburne, William Morris, and Oscar Wilde. Next, we have Victorian novels. Victorian novels tend to be idealized portraits of difficult lives in which hard work, perseverance, love, and luck win out in the end. So this represents difficult lives of the people, because a society was changing from agrarian to industrial. So there were a lot of developments taking place, not only in the country but also in the lives of the people. So as a result, the things became difficult for them. They were usually inclined towards being of improving nature with a central moral lesson at heart. While this formula was the basis for much of earlier Victorian fiction, the situation became more complex as the century progressed. So what happened? Things became difficult for people as the century progressed because of different things, different new things coming into the lives of the people, and as a result, such impact is also found in the novels. The novelists of the early Victorian age are Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, and next we have novelists of the later Victorian age are George Meredith, George Eliot, and Thomas Hardy. We will study them in detail in the next lectures. Next we have Victorian prose. Like the Victorian novel, Victorian prose compositions are unusually long, unlike the Augustan or Romantic essay. So the prose of this age is unusually long. The prose of the Augustan or the Romantic essay, they were not that long like that of Bacon's. Alright, the prose writings of the period are either treatises or the thesis of book size or essay of unusual length. So they are such a long essays which can be called as thesis or book. Like the Victorian novel, the compositions are not formally or even consciously organized. They are held together only by the argument contained therein, not by any formal design or pattern. So what happened? The compositions, they are not formally organized. Alright, so what they are held together only by the argument, which are it is not that there is no formal structure of the prose. Rather, the arguments are there. There is one argument, there is answer of another argument. So this is the pattern, design, and the format of the prose. Ruskin's Unto This Last, John Ruskin's, and Mill's Liberty are, strictly speaking, not the works of literature, but they are included into the prose. However, since they advocate the human view of life, human means urban, sophisticated view of life, as against the political, economic, and biological, they are allied to nature. Besides, they are written in a language and style which, if not truly literary, approximates the style of literature. So they are considered a piece of prose. Why? Because their subject matter is not politics, their theme is not economic, their theme is not biological, but the thing that makes them piece of literature is that they have talked about such topics which relate to the human life, which have sophisticated element. Alright, their language is also not the language of the literature, but it is the language which approximates the style of literature, almost like the literature. Prose writers of the early Victorian age are Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, Lord B. Macaulay. Prose writers of the later Victorian age are Walter Pater and John Henry Newman. Yes, I would like to conclude it by saying that it was the time of the world's first industrial revolution. Like first industrial revolution took place at that time. Political reform and social change. These were the things which took place at that time. These were the developments: industrial revolution, political reform, social change. Charles Dickens and Charles Darwin. Charles Dickens is one, he is the famous novelist, and Charles Darwin, the famous scientist or biologist, at railway boom and the first telephone and first telegraph. So these were the main important characteristics, you can say, or the developments of the Victorian age. But the Victorian era, the 63-year period from 1837 to 1901 that marked the reign of England's Queen Victoria, also saw a demise of rural life as cities rapidly grew and expanded. Long and regimented factory hours. So along with these developments, there were some demise of the rural life as cities grew, the family circle, family life decline, family values decline, and a lot of changes took place not only in the world but also in the lives of people.